The work you do behind the scenes is largely unseen, yet it is absolutely critical.
In a dusty, forgotten room at Kensington Palace, workers uncovered a secret that the royal family never wanted you to see. Hidden inside an ornate jewellery box was a chilling message carved by Princess Diana herself. What Princess Anne discovered next left her absolutely speechless. Secret letters, mysterious codes, and a key leading to shocking evidence that proves Diana's death was no accident. The truth Diana died protecting has finally been exposed, and what happens next will leave you stunned.
When I started my public life 12 years ago, I understood the media might be interested in what I did.
But here's the terrifying part. The people who silenced Diana are still out there, and now they're targeting her grandchildren. The room was small and tucked away behind layers of wooden paneling that had been deliberately closed off. Inside, dust covered everything like a blanket of forgotten time. Evening gowns still hung in their protective covers. Handwritten notes lay stacked in boxes, and framed photographs lined the shelves. All of it belonged to Princess Diana, left exactly as it had been in her final days at the palace. When news of the discovery reached Buckingham Palace, officials knew they needed someone trustworthy to handle the situation. Princess Anne, known throughout her life for her dedication to duty and her ability to maintain discretion, was the obvious choice. Anne had spent decades as one of the hardest working members of the royal family, and her reputation for staying out of family drama made her the perfect person to sort through such sensitive belongings. Anne's relationship with Diana had been complicated over the years. In the early days, Anne had found Diana difficult to understand. She viewed her sister-in-law as overly emotional and perhaps too eager for public attention. The two women came from very different worlds and had very different approaches to royal life. Anne had been born into the royal family and raised with a deep understanding of protocol and restraint. Diana, on the other hand, had married into the institution and often struggled with its rigid expectations. But as time went on, Anne had begun to see Diana differently. Away from the cameras and the public scrutiny, she witnessed Diana's genuine devotion to her sons and her passionate commitment to charitable causes. There were moments, though rare and never publicly acknowledged, when Anne had come to respect what Diana was trying to achieve. The tragedy of Diana's death in 1997 had left many questions unanswered, and Anne, like much of the world, had accepted the official narrative of a tragic accident. Walking into that sealed room more than 27 years later brought back a flood of memories. The stillness was almost overwhelming. Anne moved slowly through the space, examining items that represented a life lived under constant observation. Thousands of objects surrounded her, each one a small piece of Diana's story. But among all these possessions, one item caught her attention in a way that nothing else did. Partially hidden at the back of a shelf and covered by a silk scarf, there sat an ornate jewellery box. It was unlike anything else in the room. The craftsmanship was exceptional. Dark rosewood had been carved with intricate detail, and the surface was decorated with pearls and sapphires that caught the light even through the accumulated dust. The box had a weight to it that seemed disproportionate to its size, as though it contained more than just jewellery. Anne picked it up carefully, her gloved hands turning it over to examine every detail. The work was beautiful, clearly made by a master craftsman. As she studied the box more closely, something caught her eye. Carved into the underside of the lid, in letters small enough to be easily overlooked, was a message. The inscription read, "For those who dare seek truth, DS." The letters sent a chill through Anne. DS stood for Diana Spencer, her maiden name. Not the Princess of Wales, not her royal title, just her own name. It felt deeply personal, almost defiant. Anne looked around the room again, but this time she saw it through different eyes. Had Diana left more than just mementos behind? What truth was she referring to? And why would she hide such a message in something so beautiful? The implications were unsettling. Diana had clearly intended for someone to find this box and understand its significance. The message suggested that there was something important hidden here, something worth protecting, something worth discovering. Anne had come to this room expecting to catalogue old belongings and perhaps reminisce about a complicated family member. Instead, she found herself holding what appeared to be a deliberate puzzle. Anne's mind raced with questions. Diana had died in a car crash in Paris in August 1997. The official investigations had concluded it was a tragic accident caused by a drunk driver and aggressive paparazzi. The world had mourned, conspiracy theories had circulated, but eventually the story had faded into history. Royal life had continued. William and Harry had grown up. The monarchy had moved forward. But now, holding this box with its cryptic message, Anne wondered if there had been more to Diana's story than anyone knew. The careful way the box had been hidden, the deliberate nature of the carved inscription, the use of Diana's maiden name rather than her title, all of it suggested intention and purpose. This was not simply a sentimental keepsake. This was something Diana had wanted to be found, but only by someone willing to look beyond the surface. Anne felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Whatever Diana had left behind in this box was meant for someone brave enough to seek the truth she mentioned. The phrase kept echoing in Anne's mind. For those who dare seek truth. It was both an invitation and a warning. Diana seemed to be saying that the truth existed, but finding it would require courage. Standing alone in that dusty room, surrounded by the remnants of Diana's life at Kensington Palace, Anne made a decision. She would open the box and see what Diana had left behind. She owed that much to her late sister-in-law, even if it meant confronting uncomfortable realities or reopening old wounds. The message had been left for someone, and fate had determined that someone would be her. Anne carefully placed the jewellery box on the velvet cloth she had brought with her and prepared to examine it more thoroughly. Whatever secrets it held had been waiting nearly 3 decades to be discovered. The room, which had been silent for so long, suddenly felt charged with possibility and danger. Diana's voice seemed to whisper from the past, urging Anne forward, daring her to uncover what had been hidden all these years. Anne returned to her private chambers at Kensington Palace with the jewellery box secured carefully in a protective case. She needed privacy and quiet to properly examine what Diana had left behind. The weight of the box seemed to grow heavier with each step, as though it carried more than just physical objects inside. Once alone, Anne placed the box on a soft velvet cloth and sat down at her desk. The late afternoon light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. She found herself staring at the inscription again, tracing the letters with her eyes. For those who dare seek truth, DS. The words felt like a challenge from beyond the grave. With steady hands, Anne lifted the lid. What she saw took her breath away. The jewellery inside was stunning. There were earrings made from rare Burmese rubies that glowed deep red in the light. A sapphire bracelet sparkled with an intensity that seemed almost unnatural. An emerald and diamond necklace lay coiled at the bottom, each stone cut so precisely that they appeared to radiate light from within. These were not ordinary pieces of jewellery, they were museum-quality treasures. But as Anne examined each piece more carefully, she noticed something unusual. On the back of each item, hidden from casual view, were tiny markings. She retrieved a magnifying glass from her desk drawer and studied them closely. The markings were deliberate and precise. Some appeared to be coordinates or map references. Others looked like alphanumeric codes that could be case numbers or file references. One brooch had a series of numbers that resembled an international banking code. Anne's analytical mind began working through the possibilities. These were not random scratches or maker's marks. They were clues, carefully encoded information that Diana had embedded into these precious objects. Each piece of jewellery was essentially a breadcrumb, pointing towards something larger. Her attention returned to the box itself. The craftsmanship was so exquisite that Anne found herself examining every groove and panel. Her fingers moved instinctively over the surface, feeling for irregularities. Then, almost by accident, her thumb pressed against a slightly raised section near the bottom corner. There was a soft click, and a hidden panel shifted ever so slightly. Anne froze, her heart racing. She had found something. Carefully, she slid the false bottom open to reveal a secret compartment. Inside was a collection of items that would change everything she thought she knew about Diana's final years. There were letters, perhaps a dozen of them, tied together with a pale blue ribbon. The paper had aged slightly, but the handwriting remained clear and legible. The faint scent of lavender still clung to them after all these years. Beneath the letters lay a stack of photographs. Anne spread them out on her desk and felt a cold sensation creep up her spine. The photographs showed Diana in various locations, but she was dressed differently than her usual public appearances. In some images, she wore wigs or sunglasses, clearly attempting to disguise her identity. She was meeting with people Anne did not recognize. The settings were unusual too. Small cafes in unfamiliar neighborhoods, underground parking structures, private residences that bore no resemblance to royal properties. None of this matched the public life that Diana had been known for. Anne examined each photograph carefully, trying to understand what she was seeing. Diana appeared focused and serious in these images, nothing like the smiling princess the world had known. She was clearly engaged in activities that she wanted to keep private, meeting with individuals who were not part of her usual circle. At the bottom of the secret compartment, beneath the photographs, lay a small silver key. Attached to it was a tag with writing that made Anne's blood run cold. The tag read, "Zurich Deposit Box 837L." This was not just a collection of sentimental items. Diana had left behind a trail that led to a safety deposit box in Switzerland. Anne's hands began to tremble slightly as she reached for the letters. The top envelope bore her name in Diana's distinctive looping handwriting. The inscription read, "To Anne, please read if I am gone." The date written in the corner stopped Anne cold. It was dated just 3 days before Diana's death in Paris. She sat down slowly, suddenly aware of how significant this moment was. Whatever Diana had written in these letters, she had done so in the final days of her life. Anne carefully opened the first envelope and began to read. The ink had smudged in places, suggesting Diana had written quickly, perhaps urgently. The first sentence made Anne's world tilt. "Anne, if you are reading this, then they succeeded in silencing me." The words were stark and terrifying. This was not a goodbye letter from someone who feared an accident. This was a message from someone who believed she was in danger, someone who thought she might be killed. Anne forced herself to continue reading. Diana's letter began by recounting events from 1995, a charity gala that had seemed routine at the time. Diana explained that she had begun to notice irregularities in the set, finances of a children's charity she supported. Money that was supposed to go to international programs was not reaching its destinations. When Diana quietly asked questions, she was met with evasion and obfuscation. Financial records were incomplete or contradictory. When she pressed harder, she received subtle threats. The more Diana investigated, the deeper the corruption appeared to run. She had started keeping detailed notes, copying down account numbers and tracking money transfers. According to the letter, funds intended for landmine victims, children's hospitals, and women's shelters were being diverted into private accounts. Some of these accounts belonged to wealthy businessmen. Others, more disturbingly, were connected to individuals within the royal household itself. Anne turned the page and found lists of numbers in Diana's handwriting, bank account details, transfer amounts, dates, and recipient codes. It was meticulous documentation, the work of someone who understood. That evidence would be crucial. Diana had not just suspected wrongdoing, she had found proof. The letter continued, describing how Diana had reached out to investigative journalists. She mentioned meeting with reporters from France and Switzerland who were already tracking similar corruption networks. They had confirmed her suspicions and provided additional evidence. Diana wrote about using code names, arranging secret meeting places, and being followed. She had even begun recording her conversations, storing the tapes in secure locations. Anne sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by what she was reading. She had always thought of Diana as emotional and impulsive, someone who acted on feelings rather than logic. But this letter revealed a completely different person. This was strategic thinking. This was someone who knew she was surrounded by dangerous people and was methodically documenting everything because she understood the risks. The tone of Diana's letter shifted when she wrote about William and Harry. "I am not afraid to die," she had written, "but I am afraid for them, of what they will be forced to carry if this truth is buried with me." Anne felt tears prick her eyes, an unusual sensation for someone who prided herself on emotional control. Diana had not been paranoid or dramatic. She had been a mother trying to protect her children from forces she knew were more powerful than herself. As Anne reached the final page of the letter, her fingers froze over one sentence that Diana had underlined. "If you find this, then know I left behind a final insurance policy. Everything is hidden in a Swiss bank vault." Anne looked again at the small silver key lying on her desk. The key to deposit box 837L suddenly felt infinitely more important. Diana had not just left behind accusations or theories. She had left behind evidence, real documented proof of whatever conspiracy she had uncovered. Anne gathered all the materials carefully, her mind racing with implications. Diana had died in Paris nearly 3 decades ago, but her investigation had been preserved, waiting for someone to find it. The official story of a tragic accident suddenly seemed far less certain. If Diana had been tracking criminal activity involving powerful people, if she had been threatened and followed, then perhaps her death had not been random at all. The room felt colder now despite the warmth of the afternoon. Anne realized that by opening this box and reading these letters, she had stepped into Diana's footsteps. Whatever danger Diana had faced might still exist. The people she had been investigating might still be in positions of power. And now Anne held the key to exposing them, literally and figuratively. She looked at the key again, then at the photographs of Diana in disguise meeting unknown contacts. The truth Diana had died seeking was not lost. It was waiting in Switzerland, locked away in a bank vault, protected by decades of silence and secrecy. But Anne also understood something else. She was probably not the only person looking for it. Anne made arrangements to travel to Zurich within 48 hours of discovering the key. She moved with unusual caution, keeping her plans private even from most of her staff. Only her most trusted security personnel knew her actual destination, and even they were given a fabricated schedule to throw off anyone who might be watching. The key to deposit box 837L remained in the inner pocket of her coat, pressed against her heart like a promise she had made to Diana without ever speaking it aloud. The private jet landed in Zurich during the early morning hours when fog still clung to the city. Anne had chosen this time deliberately, knowing that fewer people would be around to notice her arrival. The Swiss bank she needed to visit was one of the oldest and most discreet financial institutions in Europe, the kind of place that had built its reputation on absolute client confidentiality. When Anne presented the key, Anne Madday, the tag marked 837L at the bank, the staff member barely reacted. Swiss bankers were trained to show no surprise, to ask no unnecessary questions, and to treat every client with the same professional neutrality, regardless of their identity. Anne was led through multiple security checkpoints, each one more advanced than the last. The deeper into the building she went, the quieter it became, until the only sound was the soft echo of footsteps on marble floors. In a private viewing room, the deposit box was brought to her. Anne took a deep breath before opening it. Inside were stacks of documents organized with meticulous care. There were financial ledgers showing money transfers across international borders, bank statements from accounts in multiple countries, receipts and invoices that detailed transactions involving charitable organizations. Colored folders separated different categories of evidence, each one labeled in Diana's clear handwriting. But what disturbed Anne most were the recordings. At the bottom of the box lay several cassette tapes and digital discs, each one carefully dated and labeled. One disc simply read, "If I disappear." Anne's hands shook slightly as she inserted it into the player the bank had provided. The screen flickered to life, and there was Diana, sitting in what appeared to be a private apartment. She wore no makeup, her face showing signs of exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp and focused. When she began to speak, her voice was calm and deliberate, nothing like the nervous or emotional woman the media had often portrayed. "If you're watching this, then I have been silenced," Diana said, looking directly into the camera. "But I want you to know what I found and why I could not just walk away." What followed was a detailed explanation that made Anne feel physically ill. Diana methodically laid out the names of people involved in an international money laundering operation. These were not unknown criminals. They were members of prominent families, wealthy businessmen who appeared regularly in newspapers, politicians who held significant power, and executives who ran major corporations. Diana explained how charitable organizations were being used as fronts to move money illegally. Millions of pounds that were supposed to help victims of war, sick children, and vulnerable communities were instead being funneled into private accounts. The money was then used to finance weapons deals, establish offshore banking networks, and support covert operations that had nothing to do with humanitarian work. Anne listened in horror as Diana described her attempts to alert authorities. Some officials had listened and seemed concerned, but others had warned her explicitly to stop investigating. Diana spoke about noticing that her car had been tampered with on multiple occasions. She no longer trusted some of her security personnel. She had started using back entrances, making phone calls from public locations, and varying her routes to avoid being followed. The most heartbreaking part of the recording came when Diana spoke about William and Harry. Her voice cracked slightly as she said, "I must leave them something more than fairy tales. They need the truth. They need to understand what kind of world they are living in and what forces are at work around them." Anne could see tears forming in Diana's eyes as she spoke about her sons, the only time in the video when her composure wavered. When the recording ended, Anne sat in stunned silence. The magnitude of what Diana had uncovered was staggering. This was not the imagination of a troubled woman. This was documented evidence of systematic corruption involving some of the most powerful people in Britain and beyond. Diana had not been paranoid. She had been absolutely right, and she had paid the ultimate price for trying to expose it. Anne was still processing everything she had seen when the bank official, who had been waiting outside, knocked softly and entered the room. His face remained professionally neutral, but his words made Anne's blood freeze. "You are not the first to inquire about this box," he said quietly. "Someone else came approximately 2 weeks ago. They claimed to be family." Anne felt her chest tighten. Someone else knew about the deposit box. Someone had tried to access Diana's evidence. She asked quickly who it had been, but the banker could only provide limited information due to privacy regulations. The person had not been able to provide the key or the proper authorization, so they had been turned away. But their attempt meant that Anne was not the only one searching for Diana's hidden truth. The implications were terrifying. If someone else knew about the Swiss deposit box, they likely knew about Diana's investigation. They might know that Anne had found the jewelry box at Kensington Palace, and if they were willing to try accessing the bank vault, they were probably willing to go much further to keep the evidence from being exposed. Anne arranged to have copies of everything in the deposit box made immediately. She could not risk leaving the evidence in just one location. As she waited for the documents and recordings to be duplicated, her mind raced through possibilities. Who had tried to access the box? Were they connected to the people Diana had been investigating? How long had they been searching for this evidence? The flight back to London felt longer than the journey to Switzerland. Anne kept the copies of Diana's evidence in a secure case that never left her side. She had already decided not to return to any royal residence immediately. Instead, she arranged to stay at a private property owned by a friend, somewhere off the usual radar of royal watchers and security protocols. When her plane landed at Heathrow Airport, Anne had no idea that her movements were already being monitored. The first signs were subtle enough that she almost missed them. Her personal phone, which she used only for family, communications began making strange clicking sounds during calls. There were odd delays and echoes that had never occurred before. Then her mail started arriving with signs of tampering. Letters that should have been sealed were stuck back together. Packages showed evidence of being opened and resealed. The most alarming incident came when her car, which was maintained meticulously by royal mechanics, suddenly failed to start in her private garage. When technicians examined it, they found a severed brake line. The official explanation was rodent damage, but Anne knew better. She had read Diana's accounts of similar incidents. This was no coincidence. Anne contacted an old friend who had retired from British intelligence services. She asked him to sweep her home and personal devices for surveillance equipment. What he found confirmed her worst fears. Tracking software had been installed on her phone. Listening devices were hidden in her private study. Someone had been monitoring her. Communications and movements, probably since she had returned from Switzerland. It was during this period of escalating concern that Anne received an anonymous package. There was no return address, no indication of who had sent it. Inside was a single piece of paper with one name written on it: Timothy Radcliffe. Anne recognized the name immediately. He had been Diana's private secretary, a quiet man known for his absolute loyalty to the princess. After Diana's death, he had disappeared from public life completely. Anne used her intelligence contacts to locate him. Timothy was living in a modest cottage outside the city of Bath, far from the spotlight he had once worked in. When Anne reached out, he agreed to meet, but only at night and only in a location he chose. They met in a small church that few people knew about, a place where they could speak without being overheard. In the dim candlelight, Timothy's face showed the weight of years spent carrying secrets. He did not waste time with pleasantries. "Your sister-in-law was not alone," he said immediately. "She trusted a small group of us, even though we had no real power to protect her. We have been waiting all these years for someone brave enough to continue what she started." What Timothy revealed over the next hour shook Anne to her core. The official investigation into Diana's death had been compromised from the beginning. Evidence had been ignored or suppressed. Witnesses had been intimidated into silence. Security camera footage from Paris had mysteriously disappeared. Reports of a white Fiat car seen at the crash site had been dismissed without proper investigation. The case had never been meant to be solved, Timothy explained. It was meant to be quietly closed and forgotten. Anne returned home that evening with Timothy's words echoing in her mind. Diana had died pursuing the truth, and now Anne had become the new target by following in her footsteps. When she arrived at her residence, she found a single envelope that had been slipped under her door. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and the message inside was brief and chilling. "Stop digging, or join her." Anne stared at the threat for a long moment. Her hands trembled, not from fear alone, but from anger. These people, whoever they were, had silenced Diana. They had gotten away with it for nearly 3 decades, and now they thought they could intimidate her into abandoning the truth. But they had miscalculated. Anne had spent her entire life fulfilling her duty, following rules and maintaining dignity in the face of adversity. She had never backed down from a challenge, and she was not about to start now. Diana's voice seemed to echo from the past, urging her forward, demanding that the truth finally be heard. Anne spent the following days and nights locked away in her private study, carefully analysing every piece of evidence Diana had left behind. The documents from Switzerland, the letters from the jewellery box, and the testimonies from people like Timothy Radcliffe all pointed to the same disturbing conclusion. Diana had not simply stumbled into danger by accident, she had uncovered a vast network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of British society and beyond. Anne created timelines on large sheets of paper, connecting names to dates and financial transactions. She cross-referenced bank accounts with charitable organisations and traced the flow of money across international borders. The deeper she investigated, the clearer the picture became. Diana's humanitarian work, particularly her campaign against landmines and her visits to war zones and refugee camps, had inadvertently placed her at the centre of something far more sinister than she could have initially imagined. Behind the photo opportunities and media coverage, shadowy figures had been using royal movements as cover for their illegal activities. When Diana travelled to Angola or Bosnia, when she met with victims and drew international balsamas attention to humanitarian crises, others were using those same trips to facilitate arms deals and launder money through supposedly legitimate charitable channels. Diana's presence provided the perfect distraction, the perfect cover story for people moving large sums of money and making dangerous connections. What hurt Anne most deeply was the betrayal. Diana had trusted many of these people. She had smiled with them at state dinners, spoken warmly about them in interviews, and defended some of them when they faced criticism. Yet several of them had been part of the very system that ultimately destroyed her. Anne found evidence in the financial records of transactions approved by people within the palace inner circle. She traced bank accounts and charity registrations back to individuals who had regular access to royal family members. One name kept appearing throughout Diana's documentation, someone whose public image had always been impeccable, someone who had never been touched by scandal, someone Anne had known personally for years. The realization made her feel physically sick. This was not some distant criminal operating from the shadows. This was someone close to the family, someone who had betrayed Diana while maintaining a facade of respectability and duty. Anne reached out to Timothy Radcliffe again, and together they contacted one of Diana's former colleagues from the Red Cross. After much consideration and with obvious reluctance, the woman confirmed what Anne had begun to suspect. Diana had been working with an investigative journalist in the months before her death. They were preparing a joint report that would have exposed not just wealthy businessmen, but also members of the royal family and government officials who were complicit in the corruption. That report never saw the light of day. The journalist was found dead just 3 weeks after Diana's fatal crash in Paris. The official cause of death was listed as a drug overdose, another case that was quickly closed without thorough investigation. The pattern was unmistakable. Anyone who got too close to the truth ended up silenced. In the final stack of documents, Anne discovered a file labelled Operation Marionette. The name itself was chilling, suggesting that people were being controlled like puppets on strings. Inside were letters exchanged between foreign intelligence contacts and a private security firm that had been contracted to monitor Diana's movements in the months before her death. The language was careful and coded, but the implications were clear. They had been tracking her, documenting her meetings, and reporting her activities to someone else. The final page contained a phrase that made Anne's hands shake. Ensure containment before Paris trip, risk elevated. The date on the document was from July 1997, just weeks before Diana died. Anne read the sentence repeatedly, trying to find some other interpretation, some way it could mean something innocent. But there was no other reasonable explanation. This was not a warning about paparazzi or public safety. This was an order to stop Diana before she could expose what she had learned. Anne followed the trail further and discovered something that had never been made public. There was a surveillance photograph from the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris, taken moments before the crash that killed Diana. The image was grainy, but clear enough to show the white Fiat Uno that had been mentioned in some witness reports but never properly investigated. More significantly, behind that car was a second vehicle that had never been identified or discussed in any official investigation. Anne traced the license plate information through her intelligence contacts. The second car was registered to a company that had direct links to an associate of a royal household staff member. The connection was undeniable. This was not coincidence or conspiracy theory. This was documented evidence that Diana's death had been staged to look like an accident while actually being something far more deliberate. Anne sat alone in her study that night, one hand resting on the surveillance photograph. She looked at the image of Diana that she had pinned to her investigation board. A photograph of her sister-in-law smiling and radiant, completely unaware of the danger that surrounded her. For the first time in her adult life, Princess Anne allowed herself to truly break down. Tears came slowly at first, then in steady streams. Anne was not accustomed to showing emotion. She had been raised in a world where restraint and control were paramount, where personal feelings were always secondary to duty and public image. But tonight, alone with the weight of what she had discovered, she could not maintain that facade any longer. She cried for Diana, for the young woman who had entered the royal family with hope and kindness, only to discover that she had walked into a nest of vipers. She cried for the opportunities she herself had missed to support Diana, to listen to her concerns, to take her seriously when she tried to speak about the dangers she perceived. Anne remembered dismissing Diana's fears as melodramatic, her emotions as excessive. Every letter, every recording, every piece of evidence now proved that Diana had been more aware and more courageous than anyone had understood. "I should have listened," Anne whispered to the empty room. The guilt settled heavily on her chest. Diana had tried to raise alarms, to expose corruption and protect her children, but the royal establishment, the media, the palace machinery, and Anne herself had all turned away. Diana had been labelled difficult and unstable. In reality, she had been desperately trying to survive and to save others from the rot consuming the institution from within. As Anne finally composed herself, her secure phone rang. It was Timothy Radcliffe, and his voice was strained with urgency. "There has been movement at Lambrook," he said, referring to Prince Skyardan. "George's school. There was an attempted security breach. We believe the network is now targeting the boys. You need to act immediately." Anne moved quickly, activating trusted contacts. A retired MI5 director agreed to help, dispatching covert protection teams. Anne left Kensington Palace under cover of darkness, carrying flash drives with all of Diana's evidence. She would expose the entire network before they could harm anyone else.